USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, being recorded on April 1st, 2019. I'm Ed Trefzger with Jim Connelly, and this podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, 10 days away, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. But Jim, it was an eventful and entertaining weekend of hockey. You had blowouts, you had overtime games, you had upsets, everything you'd want in the regionals.
Yeah, and I love the fact that they're now going to put North Dakota in as a fifth team to the Frozen Four. That is a big part. Sorry, happy April Fool's Day. But no, seriously, I thought this was a really good regional weekend. You had fantastic storylines with some upsets. Obviously, the AIC over St. Cloud upset is the one that stands out the most. 16 over a 1 seed for the second straight year. A couple of shutouts from multiple goaltenders. UMass and Denver advanced to the Frozen Four without allowing a goal. That's pretty big. Providence as the number 4 seed, maybe in a controversial way, although the brackets aligned, in my opinion, to get them to play in Providence. Great crowd for both nights, and they find a way to get to the Frozen Four themselves. And then Minnesota Duluth, our defending national champion, back again, and you have to look at them as the favorite going into Buffalo. It was a great weekend of hockey. There's nothing like watching that many games over the span of 3 nights, and I think college hockey fans can really enjoy the great coverage that comes out of the ESPN family of networks over the weekend. But there was so many interesting storylines. We have 20 to 30 minutes to talk about it. We might as well.
Well, I can say this, that my bracket, I have 2 regions that were perfect, and I have 2 regions where I got every game wrong. And one of those where I got every game wrong was the West region. And that big one was the upset of St. Cloud by AIC. And, you know, during the broadcast, a lot of emphasis was put on problems with the ice being soft and so forth. But I think really you have to point to 2 things. AIC playing exactly the game plan they wanted and that they've played all season, and a stellar performance in net from Zacharias Skog.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that AIC kept St. Cloud to the outside. They made them play along the walls a lot more than they wanted to. They did not get a lot to the net. Skog was good, didn't have to be outstanding. Like, he was very good in net, but he didn't have to stand on his head and make, 5 to 8 grade A's that you wouldn't expect a goaltender to make. And then opportunistic. They got the puck to the net a couple of times, really had to bang it home. They weren't pretty goals, but you find a way to win those games. It's the 3rd time in 4 years, if I'm right, that an Atlantic hockey team has upset a top seed, and it's happened every year since 2006 that one of the top seeds falls. This year it ended up being 2, but that one of them falls. And St. Cloud, again, it's very difficult. They're now going to have a little bit of a mental block. I got to say, the upperclassmen next year will be thinking about, if they get back to the tournament, how do we get past the first round? Because of the fact that now 2 years in a row, Air Force and AIC end up knocking off St. Cloud. And credit to the Atlantic hockey teams, and Bob DiGregorio has to be proud of this. 16 years as a league, they've had 7 first-round NCAA tournament wins, 8 overall. And, that's something to hang your hat on, because there's a lot of the leagues in the country, or well, maybe not a lot, but there's some leagues in the country that would like that winning percentage, would like that ability to get out of the first round, because there were leagues this weekend that didn't get out of the first round at all.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those. I think what's also interesting with the AIC St. Cloud matchup is that the only goal for St. Cloud was kind of fluky. It was supposed to be a centering pass that ended up going off a AIC defenseman's helmet and into the net.
Right.
So, could have been a shutout there for American International. Now, it was a shutout on the other half of that bracket in both games. Denver 2-0 over Ohio State, and then 3-0 over American International on the second night. But how about Denver? Are they playing a little bit above what people expected, or is this what we should be seeing from the Pioneers?
We talked on one of last week's podcasts about the fact that Denver doesn't have to get a lot of shots on net, and they generate, and they are very opportunistic. They find ways to get a few great, opportunities to score each game, and they bury. And that was what happened this weekend. They did not have a ton of grade A's both nights. I think the first night, maybe 13 shots against Ohio State, and they ended up with 2 goals. And then on the back end, their defense is very good. They bubble really well. They protect the net. Their goaltender is pretty outstanding when he has to be, but you don't see those massive grade A's. It's almost what we were talking about with Skog. Like, you don't have to, have a goaltender, stopping 5 or 6 shots that would be goals. These guys don't give up the opportunities. It's a defensive game. It's a really lockdown game as well. And I thought that was what Denver did both nights. They were very opportunistic. I thought in the third period, especially against AIC, finding ways to not generate much, but when they generated, those were really good opportunities. They ended up in the back of the net, and good for Denver for getting there, because this is a team I saw them way back. I think it was late December. I saw them and liked a lot about their game, but kind of sat back and said, boy, they just don't get the chances. They don't get those grade A's, but when they do, they're in the back of your net.
Now, I know the Big Ten with 7 teams in the league is really stuck on what kind of a format you can have for the playoffs, and the way they do it, giving the top team a bye and then playing down from there, makes sense. But because Ohio State was upset by Penn State in the semifinal round, the Buckeyes only had 1 game over the course of 27 days. And you got to think that the league might want to look at a different approach to that. You got to think that not having some game time had to be difficult for Ohio State.
I would honestly think, if I was the Big Ten, that I might consider eliminating the 7th place team, having 3 play 6, 5 play 4 in a best of 3, then have the remaining teams play 1 and 2 in another best of 3. Get some skating time out there for these teams. Get some game time, because I do think that, Ohio State was a fantastic team all year. They didn't have a lot of blips in their long radar screen, but then they lose the last 2 games of their season. They're gone. You lose the Big Ten championship and you lose the NCAA tournament, and one and done in both of them. It's a tough approach. I know the Big Ten is probably more focused on making their league like a basketball conference than a hockey conference, but I think that they'd be better served giving the teams more chances to get out there and skate and play games than less.
Maybe even, and I hate to suggest it because consolation games are almost by the wayside, except for the NCAA.
Don't say it.
Yeah, okay.
Don't say it.
All right, I won't say it. I almost brought it up.
We can't add consolation games in college hockey. They just don't make sense.
And they can be ugly. But anyway, so Denver emerges from the West region, and they will face UMass. And that, why don't we go to that one next, since that was the other Saturday matchup, the Northeast Regional. And UMass, I think this is the best characterization of it. Greg Carvel called his team's performance this past weekend a buzzsaw.
I agree with it. I mean, they were locked down. They didn't give up grade A's. They found ways to get to the net. And that's a team that will score 90% of their goals from within 15 feet of the net, maybe even within 10 feet. That they're a front of the net team. They did that all weekend. And then when you look at the fact that their defense allowed nothing against 2 teams with Harvard, one of the best power plays, Notre Dame, just one of the better offenses, the fact that they gave up nothing. And if you look at the site today, Dave Hendrickson has a great feature on Philly Lindbergh, the goaltender for UMass. And I'm sure Greg Carvel wants to be complimentary of his goaltender, but it almost made it sound like Lindbergh just kind of stands in there and doesn't do much. I think Greg Carvel said, I could have thrown on the pads in the Notre Dame game and got a shutout. That's what his defense is allowing right now. They're locked down. So I think that, the fact that those 2 teams are going to meet in the Frozen Four in the national semifinal, the late game on Thursday, the 11th of April. The fact they'll meet Denver and UMass, I wonder if anybody's going to get a shot on goal. It's just one of those games where you have two teams that are such good defensive teams, such lockdown teams, decent goaltending, maybe great goaltending. We don't know because I don't think their goalies get tested enough. But I really am impressed with both of these teams, and I am anxious to see them play in Buffalo.
Well, and something that I think you kind of pointed out without mentioning it is everybody talks about Cale Makar, and I think he's the odds-on winner for the Hobey Baker Award. And that hat trick will be announced on Thursday. But people got to remember how good he is defensively, too.
He's learned it. I don't think last year that was his forte. He could rush the puck. He could play as well offensively with anybody maybe in the nation last year. But back end, he has gotten so much better. Being in position, especially on the penalty kill, especially in those really tight situations, finds a way. He's got Mario Ferraro next to him a lot of the time, and he's a really good defensive defenseman. UMass, their strength is their back end, and they generate offense off of it, but they also play really good defense from the back end, and obviously Ferraro and Makar really lead the way with that.
And the other thing to remember about Makar is he's really the guy who you could probably, if you had to pick one player for UMass who is responsible for the team being this good, and maybe one decision, it was his decision to come to UMass after there was a coaching change in the off season. Greg Carville hired 5 wins that season for UMass, and Makar, probably more than any other player, has been responsible for how good UMass has become.
Yeah, I mean, and sticking with it, the fact that he came after a 5-win season, knowing the coach that recruited him wasn't there anymore. And, the fact that after 1 year last year, he stuck with it. He kind of smelled it, smelled that blood in the water. The fact that UMass could be just that good of a team. He understood it. I think he's got some good leadership qualities. Obviously, he doesn't wear a letter, but, there's some leadership qualities that I think that NHL teams will be kind of, Colorado, but I mean, anybody that might ever see him down the road, but NHL teams would like to have. You like those leaders. You like the people that understand what it means to win, that know kind of the mentality you have to have as a good player, or maybe a great player. I don't know. I'm not a talent evaluator. I'm not an NHL scout, but I look at him and just say that he has so much ability to go on to the next level and have a lot of potential. And it's not all just on the ice. I think he has a head. He has probably a personality. I've never really met him in one of those situations, like in a long type of interview to really know. But I think that he just has what you see of him right now. You feel like he has that persona to be a real leader at the next level.
The other matchup in that regional that was really overshadowed by the win by UMass was the game between Notre Dame and Clarkson. It turned out to be every bit the game that we thought. Two very systematic, detail-oriented, and discipline-oriented coaches in Casey Jones and Jeff Jackson, and that game took overtime to settle 3-2 win for Notre Dame.
And you and I talked about that last week as we were previewing all this, and my belief was that was the heavyweight game of the first round. And I know that neither of those teams were in the Frozen Four, but that was the heavyweight battle. I mean, that was by far the best game on the ice. Notre Dame yet again finding ways to come back. I think, four playoff games in their last 5 over NCAAs and Big Ten and all that stuff. In single elimination games that they needed the last minutes of regulation or overtime to win the game. They needed both. They had to score, I think, with just over 2 minutes left to tie the game, and then won it in overtime. And it was a fantastic matchup. And I was really impressed with both teams. I thought Clarkson played a great game and came out in the losing end. But, Notre Dame, obviously the UMass game, notwithstanding, they are a fantastic postseason team. Jeff Jackson knows how to get his guys to play in the postseason, and that game really personified great hockey to me. Really impressed with it, and They're not going back to the Frozen Four for the third straight year. I'm sure that's a frustration point for them. They ran into a buzzsaw in UMass, but a great season for Notre Dame nonetheless. And that really was the best game of the first round, in my opinion.
I'll agree with you on that. The Denver and UMass half of the bracket, we've discussed that. Coming up, we'll take a look at the East and Midwest regionals. But first, a word from the NCAA Frozen Four. You know, it's only 10 days away or less by the time you listen to this. It's April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot, saved by Morris. Takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Continuing on with the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Jim, let's go to the East Regional where Providence and Minnesota State got things rolling. And my goodness, you know, there was a lot of complaining on the selection about Providence getting a hometown game, not on their home ice, but 10 minutes away from campus at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in downtown Providence. And as I was watching that game, I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's put all the whining away. 11 minutes and 8 seconds into the game, it was 3-0 Minnesota State. And then it became a different game.
They owned the game, Minnesota State, and they were in great position to win that one, get their first ever NCAA tournament win. And then things changed. Providence got a late goal. And then I think the big moment in that game was kind of late in the first period. A 4-1 lead for Minnesota State looked imminent. And then they called the goal back because of offside. And it was one of those, it was the rule where if the player had held possession, he got his skates in the zone first before the puck. But because he bobbled the puck, now he doesn't have possession. Now the play is offside. After a long video review on that one, they finally called it offside. That was a changing moment. And then Vimal Sukumaran early in the second period made it a 3-2 game, and you could just feel the building shift. You know, it was a very good crowd in Providence, and you felt the building shift on that one goal, that one moment. That made it 3-2. Providence ends up tying at 3-3. Then you've got a tilt going in the third period. I thought both teams were really kind of locked down. Neither were really allowing a lot of grade A's. Then a 5-minute major to Minnesota State that allowed Providence to score not once but twice with the man advantage. They ended up with 4 power play goals in the game. Penalties really ended up hurting Minnesota State. Providence ends up rolling out of that game. I don't think, 12 minutes into that game that you could ever think that Providence had a chance. That's the first time in Nate Lehman's coaching at Providence that they've ever come back from 3 goals down. I think Mike Billings, their SID, told me, I think it was 2000 was the last time that Providence rallied from a 3-goal deficit. And they ended up getting that win. It was a huge momentum shift in that game. How a team can come from 3-0 down. I couldn't imagine doing it on a national stage. I would think 3-0 is a nail in the coffin, but Providence found a way. They used the home crowd a little bit to get the building going and found a way to win.
Well, scoring a couple of times on a major penalty helps too. That locked it away, really.
That's a big part of it, in the power play, 4 for 7 in that game. I think they were 5 for 9 on the weekend. And when your power play is going in the postseason, I one of our good friends, Rick Godkin, he always says there's 3 things. It's goaltending, experience, and special teams in the playoffs. And Providence has a lot of experience because they, have been in 6 straight NCAA tournaments. Their goaltending, I didn't think was great for the first period, but it got better. And then, after the 11:08 mark of the first period on Saturday was shut down. No goals allowed after that. And then special teams, being 5 for 9 on the power play. I don't think they allowed, if I remember right, I don't think they allowed they definitely didn't. They didn't allow a goal on special teams at all. For either opponent, Minnesota State or Cornell. So, when you're playing that well, that's the formula. But putting yourself in a 3-0 hole. Providence can't do that in the Frozen Four. They're not going to be able to chase a game in a Frozen Four. You can do that maybe in a regional where a team that doesn't have a ton of experience, has never won a game, is playing. But for the most part, you can't chase a game after this point.
And now Minnesota State 0-6 in the postseason. The last time we were helped out by our colleague Chris Lurch on that. Mankato was at Division III and won a semifinal over Elmira College in 1990. That's the last time they won an NCAA game. Is this something that is going to continue to get in the heads of the Mavericks? What do they do to get past this?
It's a good question. You would think that it could, but the reality is that players change year to year. Personnel changes. I mean, if they're back next year, maybe that's in your head. If it's 3 more years before they get back to the tournament, then it's you've wiped the slate clean. They're different players. Maybe the coach, Mike Hastings. I think he's a great coach. He's a great tournament level coach. We saw obviously with the U.S. national team this year, but I don't know. I wouldn't think that it gets in your head, but all you need is the smallest little bug to get in there and kind of just change the way players think. And you never know. It depends on how much it's talked about on campus and those sort of things. Don't forget St. Cloud for a long time, and now they're kind of back in it. But don't forget St. Cloud for a long time didn't win an NCAA tournament game, and then they finally got the monkey off their back. So I guess you just never know. I wouldn't think that it would be a big hurdle, but mental blocks in hockey just seem to go a long way.
The other half of that bracket in the semifinal in the region, Cornell romped over Northeastern, and that's not something that I was expecting.
No, it was kind of a tough effort for Caden Primo, who the next day signed with the Montreal Canadiens and will probably be, if not making an appearance before the end of the season, being groomed to be a goaltender in their system. He just had a bad game. The first and third goals he'd like to have back, especially the first one, because that kind of put Northeastern on their heels and had them chasing right, kind of from the midway point of the first period. Cornell in that game was really impressive. I thought that they were heavy. They were body on. They weren't throwing hits, but they were leaning on Northeastern players, and you could tell Northeastern did not like that. The other thing that I thought that Northeastern got caught doing a little bit was chasing the players. You watch Sunday's regional final, and Providence let Cornell come to them more, whereas Northeastern was trying to go hard with the forecheck. Cornell was beating that forecheck and then moving up ice with ease. Sunday, they had a really hard time because Providence just sat back and let the game come to them a little bit more. And in doing that changed Cornell's approach a lot. And when you have to just shift your focus on how you're going to play the game and try to be more patient. Obviously, Cornell, great team. I really was impressed with well coached. Just that's a team that's banged up, a lot of injuries. They lost so many man games to injury this year, but they did not have the ability to be patient on Sunday. They did on Saturday. They didn't have to worry about that. They could just kind of run the game they wanted to play. And Northeastern kind of fed into it too much, almost too much, and just was not the game I was expecting. Jimmy Madigan's team had been so impressive down the stretch, and for one day it fell apart. I wouldn't say if you'd play that game, 100 times, I'd say Northeastern probably wins 95 of them. But that one day they were dominated.
Austin McGrath had a pretty decent weekend, better on Saturday than Sunday. He was in to fill in. You talk about being banged up. Matthew Galida with a kind of a freaky injury in overtime in the championship game in the ECAC. But I thought that he did well enough that he played well enough for Cornell to have won both those games.
Yeah, he did. He bobbled some pucks on Sunday, and that was his big problem. The first goal for Providence on Sunday in the 4-0 win for Providence came off I don't want to say a bad rebound, but it was a pop-out rebound, no coverage in front, no boxing out, and next thing you know, the six on the puck. I think it was Greg Prince scored the goal for Providence, and those types of moments. I know that they seem small, but as a goaltender, you just need those. I think he had 3. It's only 3 bobbles, but 3 bobbles with 3 bobbled pucks, and you leave those rebounds out there. Only one ended up in the back of the net, but he just didn't look the same goaltender on Sunday that he did on Saturday, because he he was spot on Saturday. He was really solid against Northeastern.
Well, let's go to the Midwest Regional in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The early game, Minnesota Duluth downs Bowling Green in overtime, 2-1. And Bowling Green must have had a little bit of deja vu all over again. After being up 2-0 over Minnesota State in the championship game in the WCHA, gave up 2 late goals, and then the Mavericks winning in overtime. Bowling Green was up 1-0 until about 3:01 left in the third period, and it ended up going into overtime, and Duluth comes away. Kepkita Mackay both times on the goals, connecting for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I mean, here we go all over again. Minnesota Duluth finding a way that first game to survive the tournament. Last year, I believe they were down 2 goals and ended up winning in overtime. This year, you're down 1, you find a way, you win in overtime. Last year was a national championship. Last year, every game was 1-goal game. This year, obviously, that won't be the case. But really, they just seem to be that team that knows how to get out of the first round. And that is sometimes the key in this tournament. And Scott Sandlin will tell you that sometimes you just have to survive, and they know survival better than anybody out there, it seems. They survived that game, and it wasn't pretty for a long time for them. They had a hard time scoring. They had a hard time really generating the chances I think that they wanted. But at the end of the day, you ask what the score is, not how you got there. And a 2-1 win was all they needed.
The other half of the bracket in the semifinal round, Quinnipiac played 52 minutes of dominating hockey against Arizona State. And then the Sun Devils just hit them with a flurry late, just came up a bit short. But that one, that flurry sort of was a portend for what would happen the next night. But that game, Arizona State and Quinnipiac, I think the off time for Arizona State probably affected them. Now, I know they did some practices with music pumped in and referees in there to try to simulate gameplay, but you just can't replicate it completely in practice.
It doesn't matter. It's still not an opponent. It's still somebody that is a familiar body. You're banging them. Maybe I don't even know what they brought in, but you're just not in a game. You're not in the intensity of a game. You don't have the crowd there. You don't have everything that you want to kind of simulate that game. It's tough. And that as an independent, as long as Arizona State is an independent, as long as they make the tournament, they're always going to have that large break of whatever it is, about 4 to 5 weeks. While other conferences play their playoffs, they're sitting back on the sidelines saying, okay, let's try to make it feel like a game, but it's not. And I thought, they had a slow start. I thought that Quinnipiac had the jump early in that first game, and I don't want to say that was the difference, because I thought that Arizona State got their legs, was a pretty solid team, and as you mentioned, down the stretch, really strong. Just bombarded the net. But when I really look at it, did I see a team that had been laid off for almost a month? Yeah, I did. And that's one of the most difficult things about being in that situation where you're an independent. Maybe if they're in a conference, they might not make the tournament because you don't have the same schedule. You don't get to build your schedule. You don't get to improve your RPI the way that they did. And I don't think that they planned their schedule to build their RPI. But I think that if you put them in a conference, maybe they're not there, but it would have helped them to have gone through a conference tournament. That's there's no doubt about that.
As we go on to the championship game in that regional, which was Minnesota Duluth and Quinnipiac, one of the things that was pointed out a lot, and I think correctly, is how much Quinnipiac missed the injured Brandon Fortunato. Their power play percentage dropped drastically after his injury. And yes, Chase Prisky's the one getting the Hobie Baker attention, and deservedly so. But Fortunato's absence really hurt Quinnipiac in this weekend, especially in the game against Minnesota Duluth.
Yeah, there's no doubt. He's a solid skater. He's a good guy on the special teams, especially the power play. And I think they would have liked him, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think they only had one loss when he was in the lineup this year. I don't know what their record was when he wasn't in, but obviously it was, 500, maybe a game below 500, something like that. That was just a game that I thought that Minnesota Duluth just had to kind of wear down Quinnipiac, and they did a good job of that. They got that lead. They had Quinnipiac chasing. Then the goal that made it 2-0 was just so big. It was just one of those plays that ended up. It was a 3-on-1 up the ice and a really good look and pass and a finish. Everything was perfect. Then Quinnipiac responds with the goalie pull, gets the game to 2-1. Then obviously the empty net goal makes it 3-1. But I thought that Duluth did everything right. They knew the game that they were playing. They knew what the situation was that they were in. They found a way mostly to win that game. Whereas Quinnipiac, you start chasing, you're missing, Fortunato. I guess that's a kind of a big thing, but they just couldn't generate the way that they typically have all year. And that was the biggest concern for me, was that they did not have the offensive opportunities. They did not make Duluth, make huge plays, didn't make their goaltender make huge saves. So a great win for Duluth. This really feels a lot like last year in the way that Duluth is kind of grinding out some of these wins. Dangerous team as we head to Buffalo.
And after the game, Coach Scott Sandelin said it was a much better performance by his team. It was more of their game, which he didn't see the night before. And against Providence, that's the game that Duluth is going to need to bring.
I would think so. Providence has some sneaky ways to score. I think they have a little bit more of an upbeat offense. Not that Quinnipiac doesn't. I think Quinnipiac actually has it. They just looked a little doldrum-like on Sunday. Providence has the ability to move that offense to a really upbeat level, and when they go, they are pretty good. I saw them way back in November, and it was the back end of a 2-game series against UMass where they lost both. And I came out of that saying, I think Providence is the best team in Hockey East. Now, just a small kind of blip on the radar, but to see them and where they've come in that time, they've gotten a little bit better. They still have a lot of the solid offense. They're going to have to push the pace against Duluth. They cannot sit back and let Duluth kind of dictate the tempo of this game. If they do, they'll be in a lot of trouble. But I like this. I like both semifinal matchups. I think they both have great storylines. They both have a lot of compelling players that will kind of be difference makers in these games. I think it should be a great 4 teams that head to Buffalo.
And now one last thing about Quinnipiac. There's a lot of good in store for them. I think it was 13 freshmen on the team, 10 in the lineup over the weekend. They're a young team that has performed above expectations this year. And so there's a lot good happening ahead for Quinnipiac.
Yeah, I think that's why, a lot of people didn't think that this was going to be their year, because they had so much, I don't want to say youth, but at least underclassmen inexperience on their team. But they most of the freshmen stepped in and played roles, and then a lot of the upperclassmen guided that team. I think that Chase Prisky is kind of a difference maker, and when he's out of the lineup, that will be, really change this team a lot. But I like the future. They have a lot of good players that are going to return to this team. They'll be a fun team to watch for years to come.
One last question before we close. Should they have swapped the lineups for the Providence and Manchester regionals?
No, I don't think so. You're still trying to put on a tournament that, I don't care what people want to say, the NCAA still has to make their budget. They still have to find a way to put this tournament on and have success. And I think that the crowds in Providence dictated, that was the highest attended regional, Providence, a few thousand more than Manchester had. No, I think that they did it right. And I know that Providence maybe people felt like they had kind of a home ice advantage. Maybe they did. They should. If I was Providence, the one thing I would do is I would try to host this tournament. I wouldn't, maybe, I don't know the relationship between them and Brown, but it's one of those things. I feel like Providence should try to take that over because it's there every other year. It seems it's a good venue, good location. That if they just hosted the thing, we'd not be talking anything about this right now. The fact that Brown hosted is a different story, but no, I don't think they should have swapped. I think they did everything right. They got the crowds. They ended up with a pretty decent crowd. I think, across the 4 regions, it was either just over or just under 40,000 for the basically, 8 days of hockey. That's not bad for an average, I think, nationwide.
Yeah, I agree with you on all those points. Well, we'll be going live from Buffalo next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Check out USCHO.com over the next couple of days for the schedule. We'll be at 716 Food and Sport right across the street from the arena. I hope you stop on by. That includes ESPN Live with Buccigross and Melrose on Friday. You can listen to it live from USCHO.com, or if you're in Buffalo, stop by and say hello. Well, for Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit USCHO.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.